Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to 5 to Thrive Live. That's our new intro music. Wow, that was interesting. Tell us what you think, and let us know how you feel about our new intro music. Anyway, I'm Karolyn Gazella, and I co-host this show with my good friend, Dr. Lise Allschuler. And today, I'll be talking with one of my other good friends, Dr. Tina Kaczor. Dr. Kaczor is a highly respected naturopathic oncologist. She has spent years helping people navigate their cancer journey, and now she teaches other doctors about integrative oncology. She is the founder of roundtablecancercare.com, and she is the co-host of the popular podcast, The Cancer Pod. But before we dive in, of course, I'd like to thank our wonderful sponsors, beginning with Cetria, a patented form of glutathione clinically proven to raise blood glutathione levels. Glutathione is the master antioxidant and the body's primary defense against free radicals. It also helps support respiratory health. For more information, visit cetriaglutathione.com. Also, cognizin citicoline, which is nature's way of keeping the brain's energy-producing centers firing on all cylinders. If you're looking for a way to enhance your brain function, including memory, focus, and attention, look for cognizin on the label or go to cognizin.com for more information. Pro Thrivers Wellness Brain is a product that contains cognizin as well as other brain-supporting nutrients and herbs. You can find Pro Thrivers Wellness Brain online at pureformulas.com. And there's also Pro Thrivers Wellness Sleep, which combines higher dose melatonin and other sleep-supporting natural ingredients specifically designed for thrivers. You can find Pro Thrivers Wellness Sleep also at pureformulas.com. And finally, Dr. Ohhira's Probiotics. It's a best-selling probiotic for more than 30 years, and it contains 12 probiotic strains that are shelf-stable, so no refrigeration is required because of a unique 3-year fermentation process. It's a very effective probiotic, and you can learn more at drohhiraprobiotics.com. Well, Dr. Kaczor, you've become one of my favorite regulars.
Well, that's flattering. Thank you.
Welcome back to 5 to Thrive Live.
Thanks for inviting me. It's always a good time.
It is. And I love this topic. You actually covered this topic on your podcast, The Cancer Pod, and I want to encourage our listeners to look for The Cancer Pod. It's a wonderful podcast. You and I are going to do a little bit of a different take on this, but let's start with something very basic. Well, why is it important to clarify some common cancer misconceptions?
It's interesting that you asked that because we just did another, it wasn't on myths, but it was on fakers and frauds and these people who pretend to be, they're influencers and they pretend to have cancer and people follow them. One of the big reasons, no matter how people get the wrong idea or any misconception that they're following and they believe is true, honestly, the biggest thing is people's lives are at stake. I mean, I really thought about that. It's egregious what goes on out there with the misinformation, that if someone's using that information and making poor choices in their own treatment or care, then that's the worst type of misconception, misinformation, myth, whatever we want to call it. If they delay proper diagnosis of their own cancer or proper treatment, than of an otherwise curative cancer, like that kind of stuff is very real and it's happening. I mean, I've seen it in my office. I'm going to give an example of a misconception that's out there, and I know it is, and that is colonoscopies. One of the things people would come to me and say is, I don't want to get it. It's very risky. It could perforate my colon. I've seen this stuff online. It's, they have this idea and they have an outsized concern for something that is extremely rare, usually happens in older patients, over the age of 70, for example. So right now we're looking at rates of colonoscopy of, at best 6 out of 10 people over the age of 45 are getting it done. But our information on colonoscopy saving lives is very good, because colonoscopies don't just screen for a tumor, they remove precancerous polyps and adenomas. So this is one that we talked about this all the time. I got to a point where I had a little piece of paper that had all the data on it, and I would show people, like, here's what you're saying, here's the data on the risks, here's the data on the benefits. And if you really are going to refuse this, I need you to sign the bottom line that I've told you all of this information, because it was unfathomable to me. But that misconception was really strong, and they held on to that. And I was like, that's really not what you should be using to make this decision. The concerns of the risk are way outsized by some anecdotal stories of people online.
Yeah, I would agree, and that's such a good point. I mean, lives are at stake. I mean, and what drives me crazy are the hucksters who are trying to sell products. I remember when we first wrote the Definitive Guide to Cancer, we had this whole section on rating these, and there was this thing that was being sold online called, black salve or something, that was being touted like, oh, you put this black salve over your tumor and it just eats away at the tumor. And that kind of stuff drives me batty. And that's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to do this show, because it's so critical. And what we're going to do is we're going to take people through some of these myths and misconceptions. Maybe some listeners have heard of these, maybe not. And I'm going to start with something very basic, and then we're just going to kind of build from there. There is a thought from some people that cancer can be contagious. What is your view on that statement? Cancer is contagious.
I think this might be an example of people hearing some little factoid, like there are organisms involved in several different cancers, to leaping a leap of logic that takes them to saying it's contagious. It's not contagious in humans. There are some organisms, about 15 to 20% of cancers around the world, not in the United States, but around the world, because we have very good hygiene here, so we don't get exposed to as many organisms as other places do. 15 to 20% is caused by organisms and infections. We have H. pylori, which is bacteria for stomach cancers, or we have human papillomavirus for various squamous cell carcinomas in the body. That's cervical cancers, and then generally mucosal layers in the head and neck with mouth, larynx, throat cancers, that kind of thing. But those aren't contagions. There's a difference. So just because an organism is involved in leading to a higher risk of having that cancer doesn't mean that it is an actual contagion. There are animals out there, dogs, and I believe Tasmanian devils are the ones that they study this most in. An odd factoid, but there are contagious cancers. There is such a thing. It's just not in humans.
Okay, cool. Well, that's a good one. Here's a biggie. If I eat cancer, it will cause my cancer to spread. So, Dr. Kaczor, does sugar feed cancer?
That might be, this is our most popular episode that we've ever done on the Cancer Pod. People are still looking that one up, because it is a misconception, and it's more complicated than that, right? So I agree, this is a biggie, because I think this is always a question, because we have to eat, and what to eat becomes a huge question. So if you look at the biology of cancers, you can say cancer cells take up sugar from our systems, from our glucose, from our bloodstream, right? So when you get a lab done, you see glucose on your laboratory values. Glucose is the primary sugar in our bloodstream, right? But it's so much more complex. The high glucose, if you have glucose, it stimulates insulin like growth factor, or insulin like growth factor, IGF is what we say for short. High levels of those hormones is not a good thing when you have cancer. The cancer may bind those hormones, and those hormones generally lead to more growth and proliferation. So glucose does provide some fuel, and it does stimulate hormones that stimulate more growth of tumors. Those things are true. The problem is we can't bring glucose to zero. So higher glucose is a higher risk for various types of cancer. So these are all truisms. I'm going to back up to say it's an oversimplification to say sugar feeds cancer, because what we can think of it more like is kind of like fanning the flames. Like if you have spikes in glucose, you are fanning the flames. If you have cancer in your body, you're causing perhaps a greater growth of tumors. So it's not completely without premise. The problem is what can you do about it? Controlling your blood sugar, your glucose, keeping it within normal limits by eating on the lower carbohydrate side, not eating simple sugars, not having a bunch of sweets, not eating processed food. All of those things really do help control your blood sugar. So that has to do with the getting cancer in the first place. When someone has cancer, higher glucose may or may not have to do with recurrence as well. So higher levels of glucose are associated with more recurrence. And so again, you just have to control the blood glucose so it's not higher. So at the end of the day, it's about not allowing glucose in your blood sugar, to spike because you're eating sweets or soda pop or highly processed meals. It is associated with a poor prognosis. Why? I don't know. Is it glucose itself fanning the flames, or is glucose leading to immune suppression, which then causes cancers to, have more growth potential? In my mind, keeping glucose on the lower end of normal is a no risk proposition for most people. So you want to control the glucose so that when you eat a meal, or even if you have something that's sugary, you're eating protein with it, you're eating fat with it, you're eating it in context of a meal. If you're going to have dessert, you do it when you've already eaten, something that has protein, fat, and fiber, and then you have dessert. Or you really want your sweet treat, make sure you're doing something very active right after, so that glucose has somewhere to go, which is your muscles. So if you're, out dancing all night and you have something sweet, that's not going to have much consequence on your blood sugar. You'll have more consequence if you eat that same sweet while you're sitting in front of the TV watching it. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's the sugar source, like you mentioned, highly processed sugar versus an apple, so that makes a lot of sense. And I love the fact that you said that, it's an oversimplification, because I think that's what cancer is so complex. When they hear something simple like that, they want to glom onto it because cancer is so complex. So some of these things are just a matter of oversimplification. And here's another one. Cancer is a genetic disease. My genes are what causes me to get cancer. True or false?
Oh boy. Can I say true and false?
I know. I wish you would, because this is another nuanced one.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
it is all too true for people who inherited a genetic mutation like the BRCA gene, BRCA1 or 2. So it's a very individualized answer, right? So population-wise, there's an estimate that up to 10% of cancers are due to a single gene defect, like that BRCA1 or BRCA2 gene, right? So single gene mutations, or deletions of it. The particular person with that hereditary risk, though, has a huge, so BRCA, for example, has a huge risk of actually having the cancer. So for that person, 80% or 65% chance of ovarian cancer, 80% chance of breast cancer, that's very real. So those people who do have that genetic defect, I'm not going to call it a defect, it's a horrible word, genetic mutation or deletion, they do have a very high risk. So that is up to 10% of cancers, which means 90% don't have a single gene defect. Now,
Mm-hmm.
we are gaining insight into something called polygenetic or multigenetic risk as well. So 10 to 20% of cancers out there may be due to small variations in multiple genes that individually don't do anything, but put all together raises cancer susceptibility. So we probably at the end of the day are looking at 30% now, if we took into account the multiple gene variations that together increase risk. We're just breaking through with whole genome sequencing to learn that now, though. So we've got a ways to go to really nail that data down.
Yeah, but it's such a good point. And as you know, I'm BRCA positive, and then my family has been studied, and many of my family members are BRCA positive. So this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. So thank you for that clarification. I think this next one is pretty important. Some people are told that taking dietary supplements if you have cancer is dangerous. I've heard a lot of people saying, "Oh, I want to take dietary supplements, but my doctor won't let me. My doctor says there's no scientific evidence and they're dangerous." What's your take on this one?
Well, I certainly think that calling them dangerous is an overstatement.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I mean, the only concern I have out there is people buying things on Amazon that are contaminated or poor product. But other than that, I don't think they're dangerous. From a purely data-driven perspective, I mean, you do have to do the foundational things first. Exercise is overwhelmingly the most beneficial aspect that you can institute in a healthy lifestyle. And then sleeping at night in a routine schedule, optimizing your circadian rhythm that way, and then eating a good diet. And then supplements being very supplemental to that already foundational good health habits. I don't think they're dangerous. I do think people need to be mindful to use supplements wisely. Get your nutrients from diet, if possible. Get your vitamin D from sunshine, if possible. But if that's not possible for whatever reason, I don't think there's any danger to taking a multivitamin, certainly. I don't think there's any danger to taking vitamin D in lower end doses, 1,000 IU a day. There's no danger in fish oil supplements. That's one that is really hard for people to get in their diet unless you are a fan of sardines and such. So I think of supplements as supplemental to the foundational pieces that are already in place, which do have more data consistently, especially exercise. You can't go wrong with that. So first you make sure you don't have deficiencies, right? With supplements, that's the first goal, is to say, okay, what could I be deficient in? Omega-3 fatty acids, very possible in a lot of people, because like I said, unless you like sardines a lot. Vitamin D, very possible for many reasons. If that's tested on blood work, is often on the low side. So I think those two are probably my top two if I had to just guess what people need. And then after a certain age, you might not be absorbing your B vitamins so well, for example. Or the other reason to use supplements that I think of as tried and true is you have a condition. You've got joint pain. You can't sleep at night. Whatever your issue is, you have digestive issues. You need to take certain enzymes so that you can eat beans. There's many reasons that supplements are very useful from a symptom management or condition management point of view too. So I think a mindful use of dietary supplements and not just buying everything that you find in a newsletter or sent to your house, because that was the one thing, is a slippery slope. Before you know it, people came in and they brought in a box of like 36 different bottles, and there's definitely a point where it's not doing you any good. And I'd rather all that go towards either a gym membership or a better food.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that especially if you're going through active treatment, it helps to have a naturopathic oncologist or an integrative oncologist on your team, because those doctors are specifically trained about interactions and what to do and how to dose it, and when to take it, and things like that. And I think for some of the more esoteric or less common things, you mentioned some foundational items that I think are perfectly great and people should be considering. But when it comes to some of these other specialized formulations, getting advice from a naturopathic oncologist or an integrative oncologist, I think would be very helpful, and having that person on your team would be very helpful.
Absolutely. Of course, I'm going to agree.
Yeah, exactly. You and Dr. Alschuler.
Yeah.
So I feel like this next one is also not black and white, but I'm interested in hearing your thoughts. Of course, I have thoughts on this, as always. Okay, so here it is. Attitude does not matter when it comes to recovery and healing from cancer.
Well,
Yes.
I think that would be a myth. The attitude doesn't matter. I think attitude does matter. I also think that we have to be careful, because it's not black and white. It's a tough question, because I never want to imply. I'm very concerned with this too. I don't want to imply that people can think their way out of something, or that they're creating things with their mind, or they're somehow responsible for their own cancer because they were sad or angry or this or that. I don't want to put that burden on anyone, because I think that that's not founded. But I do think attitude is important, but I always frame it more about the present, right? So the best thing about a positive attitude and being joyous and being grateful and maybe addressing any anxiety or depression that is underlying your life is that's today's quality of life, regardless of what else is going on. It's all about living the best you can today. And so when it comes to being healed, whether you have cancer or not, being healed to me doesn't necessarily mean you're disease free, whether it's cardiovascular disease, diabetes, or cancer, but it means you're living your life to its fullest capacity. So in that regard, I think attitude is very, very important, right? For a good life.
Yeah, I agree. I'm so glad, because I always got concerned whenever we would write about this or talk about it at conferences and such. I always got concerned that somebody in the audience would be like, "Oh darn, I caused my cancer," or "Oh darn, I'm feeling depressed, so I'm going to make my cancer worse, or I'm going to get cancer again," and I feel that there's a balance in finding the power that's associated with a positive attitude and gratitude and optimism and all these wonderful things. And yet there's also this double-edged sword where you don't want to use that against you. I mean, the research is pretty clear that when we're optimistic and grateful, we do have better outcomes. But yeah, I think there's a balance there. And I'm just so glad that you pointed that out, because life is challenging enough without having us beat up ourselves because we're having a down day and we're worried that a down day is going to make our cancer come back.
Exactly. That's exactly the concern with putting the burden on someone's shoulders that way. So I think that's probably why I frame it in the present and I leave cancer out of it, because I think in some ways it's not really relevant to the discussion. I mean, the idea of being grateful and optimistic and feeling joy in life is separate from your condition. There's not a time that I wouldn't advocate for that, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Whether you have cancer or not, or whether you have any other condition. So yeah, and it's I feel that it's more enjoyable to be optimistic and positive and everything else.
Yeah, and I want to say that I think that some people do need the medications to make sure that they don't go into deep depressions. I mean, I think there is biochemical imbalances for some people that cannot be treated fully naturally. So I always say that because I've known people like this. I mean, you could do everything perfectly, but if you, for whatever reason, have an imbalance in your neurotransmitters such that even doing everything you possibly can with your lifestyle and, whatever your therapies, cognitive behavioral therapies, or what else you do to address it, if you still are left needing a medication to have a positive attitude in life, then so be it. I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world.
I would agree. I would agree wholeheartedly. Okay, so some people are told that a second opinion is not necessary. What do you feel about second opinions? What do you tell your patients? Because I bet that patients often ask you about second opinions.
I have the advantage of knowing whether their cancer is common or not, or whether that second opinion is really going to vary at all. There are scenarios where it's not going to, and that would be the more prevalent the cancer, the more likely the second opinion is not going to vary much. The rarer the cancer, the more likely I am to say, you need to go see somebody who just sees that cancer all day long. So if someone has a sarcoma, or they have multiple myeloma, or they have even leukemia, you go to a center that has oncologists who see only that condition all day long, because our community clinics, as good as they may be, don't have the same experience with rare cancers and rare tumors that a large center or an academic center that is specializing in that particular cancer is going to have. So I would say for sure, if it's a less common cancer, you get a second opinion. There's not even a doubt in my mind. My one concern is delay of treatment. It has to happen quickly, I think. Just get it going, because delay of treatment is never a good thing. That is one thing that's pretty consistent in the data, is when people put off treatment. Actually, one study that said alternative medicine was associated with worse outcomes. It really wasn't. When you parsed out the data in the study, it wasn't the alternative medicine. It was that people put off conventional medicine longer. So regardless of whether they did an alternative or not in that study, even people who didn't do alternative medicine, if they delayed their treatment, they had worse outcomes. So I wouldn't do it and delay treatment, but I do think that rarer cancers certainly need a second opinion.
That's such a good point. Yeah, it's really a good point. Okay, so we have a few minutes before I want to wrap up. Did I miss anything? Is there a myth or misconception that you would like to end with?
Well, I'm just going to do a shameless plug for our last episode on seed oils. So there's a lot on there. Apparently influencers are all over the seed oils and claiming that it's because of seed oils that we're seeing colorectal cancer in younger people. And yeah, that's probably a myth.
So seed oils, so people are consuming seed oils and they're getting cancer. Is that what the myth is?
Well, in the word seed oils, I don't even know where this came from. It's not a medical term, and it's not a term you're going to see in nutrition books. But seed oils, by that they mean safflower oil, sunflower seeds, soybeans. They're going to put soy and corn in there. So they mean vegetable oils.
I see. Okay. I haven't heard that one. So I'm
Oh,
glad you brought it up.
see? That's because
Yeah.
you don't follow these influencers.
I do not. I'm not a big social media. I probably should be from a marketing standpoint, but I'm not. I'm just like, no, I'm not
Me either.
social media savvy. So, okay, well that is a good one. Thank you for that. So, where can people find out more about you and your work? Do you have any websites or any information that you can share with us so they can find more about you?
Well, you can find me online. Thecancerpod.com has a website, so you can find me there and at the Cancerpod on any social media places. That's probably not going to be me. It's going to be my co-host, Leah Sherman. But in any case, that's where that is. And my own website is Roundtable Cancer Care. And I've been posting kind of in real time more lately on LinkedIn, mostly on cancer-related topics and quite a bit on brain health. And what I like is to follow PhDs and fellow colleagues or even MDs that are steeped in the medicine so that I can not only be there helping my colleagues, but also learning myself. So you'll see me posting there.
Yeah, that's great. And you and I have done shows on brain health, and you've helped me out with some articles that I've written on the topic. And you're a wealth of information. And yeah, I highly encourage, especially, I mean, you're listening to this podcast, you're going to love the Cancer Pod. So check out the Cancer Pod, and then also go to roundtablecancercare.com and then look up Dr. Kaczor on LinkedIn. Dr. Kaczor, once again, you're a wealth of information, and this has been great. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
All right. Well, that wraps up this episode of 5 to Thrive Live. Once again, I'd like to thank our sponsors, ProThriver's Wellness Sleep Formula, Cetria Glutathione, the superior glutathione to support liver and immune health, Cognizant Citicoline to help enhance memory, focus, and attention, and Dr. Ohhira's award-winning shelf-stable probiotic. This has been a great show. May you experience joy, laughter, and love. It's time to thrive, everyone. Have a good night.